with. You could also look at it from the perspective that Carolina's owned NC State and that this is a chance for Carolina to get off to a really good start in conference before going on the road to play a Georgia Tech team that last year, wasn't good, but found a way to have a pretty good amount of success against you. I mean, they were up 30-6 on you in your building. So, I think that's definitely not the easiest start that you can have, but it's also not the toughest start. I think that after that, you look at some of the games that come up after that. I mean, Syracuse at home, I think you like that. Away at Miami. I know Jim Larrañaga's there. I know that team's had a success in the past. I don't think that team's really going to be much improved over last year's team. I think there's still a lot of questions about them. And then Clemson. So I think, even though it is a tough schedule, you get a chance to start off. If you look at that, you would probably think in your mind we should start 4-1, if not 5-0 in conference. That's your hope there.
Yeah, you look at the Syracuse game. Carolina, before they lost in the ACC tournament to the Orange, had won 9. I think it was 9 in a row against Syracuse. Roy Williams is as good as any coach in the country, coaching against that famed 2-3 zone. At Miami is always difficult. Chris Lykes is a very good guard. They're projected to be in the top half of the ACC this year, so that's going to be a test. I think no environment there helps Carolina. When that place can put fans in the stands and they can get behind their team, it's a very tough place to play. I always remember we went there in 2014 and LeBron James and Dwayne Wade walked in and we just got our asses kicked. You don't have to worry about that this year. Then the home game against Clemson, the psychological battle for the Tigers is gone. They beat you in the Smith Center last year. So what is that game now? Because for the longest time it was just the fact that you enter that game already having mentally beaten Clemson. Clemson is not going to be a very good team this year. They'll be an average team at best, but they'll be confident knowing they can go into that building and get a victory. But I'm with you. I think while it's very difficult, Carolina should at the worst be 3-2 in ACC play. Yeah. You're looking for probably 4-1, if not 5-0. You leave the home game against Clemson, you go back on the road to Florida State. The thing about that's 4 of your first 6 on the road in ACC play. The last time Carolina did that was 2017. That team won the national championship. That team also went 3-1 in such road games with the one lone loss at Miami. So you've got that weird comparison in there. Florida State is projected to finish ahead of you in the ACC third. Leonard Hamilton has done a fantastic job his entire time in Tallahassee. Now that team is even more nationally relevant. They're just as deep. They're just as talented as just about any other non-blue blood program in this conference. They're going to be a tough out. You don't go in the Tucker Center and win, but it'll be a good measuring stick for Carolina early on in the ACC slate because you go from there, then you get Wake at home and State at home. Wake Forest completely rebuilding now under as their head coach is now slipping my name or slipping my head.
I just saw him on the timeline the other day.
But Steve Forbes, who did a fantastic job at East Tennessee State. Was a logical pick for Wake Forest to hire once Wes Miller showed no interest in taking that job, and you get State at home. So you get back-to-back home games. They're rivalry games, if you want to call them. But both games you should feel good about as you're ending the month of January.
Yeah, Florida State's interesting because, again, they're built like some of the teams that we've seen in prior years. Last year, they weren't really built big inside. They had a couple of guys that were big, but the reason that they were successful was because they could shoot the ball really well. This year, they're going back to that more traditional. They've got, I think, a couple of 7'3" guys or something inside. So what we're used to seeing from Florida State. But you mentioned with Miami about the environment. That's the thing that hurts Florida State in this game. If that game could have a full capacity crowd, which they probably that's the one thing that you got to recognize about those games against Miami, against Florida State. It won't be packed, but there will be fans there because Florida has a little bit looser restrictions than the state of North Carolina does, some of the other states that you're going to travel to. So there will be fans there, but it won't quite be the same. I actually, then after that, I really like that slate after that. I think, you mentioned the home game against Wake Forest should be a win. Home game against State should be a win, you would imagine. You get Pittsburgh on the road. Again, you would think that they're going to try to take another step forward. but they've still, they're still not a program that you think is at that spot just yet, probably still in the bottom half of the ACC. And then a Notre Dame team that, again, we don't really know. I mean, we don't know exactly what to make of them. Last year, they were worse than I think a lot of people thought they would be because they had some injuries, but I think still that game's at home as well. I think that part of the schedule sets up for you to have some really good success before then you hit the home stretch of the season where you are going to face some tough games.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Carolina, that month of January is going to set the tone. I think you've got to stack wins entering February because, as it usually happens, that's when the schedule gets tougher. Ideally, you want to probably be 8-2 entering the month of February in conference play. Who the two losses are don't really matter, but if you want to be a contender to win the ACC regular season, which Carolina values more than winning the ACC tournament, you've got to take care of the teams you got to take care of. That's what they struggled with last year, was that even though they lost so many games, they played Duke and Virginia and Louisville, some of the top tier teams, tough, but they couldn't beat the Miamis, they couldn't beat Georgia Tech, some of those schools that really that's where you win or lose regular season titles, is taking care of the games you got to take care of, whether you're at home or on the road. And so I think that's going to be the thing. So you end January. It's been a while since we did a podcast because I can't talk tonight. And you go into February, and you've got a return game at Clemson, as Clemson's one of the 5 teams that Carolina plays twice. And Clemson is what it is. I think the thing when you look at Carolina's road games, outside of like when they go to Duke and maybe Louisville, the tougher environments will be hindered by not having full capacity. If they had full capacity, Clemson's a tough place to go play. Yeah. They sell out when the Tar Heels come to town. They normally play their best game. They get up for us. If they can't be fully, if Little John can't be full, the environment won't be the same. Carolina should have no problem. You go from that and you go to Duke. And we know what the game with Duke is. It's on a Saturday this year, which means both games on Saturdays for back-to-back years, as TV is really taking control of the direction of this rivalry. I, for one, have grown to love the move of making them both on Saturdays, unless I got to work. Yeah. If I got to work, then I'll complain about it. But the game with Duke is what it is. It's the best rivalry in sports. It's in that setting. But there's a very good chance that there won't be you could be playing in an empty Cameron Indoor Stadium, and I think if there's one thing when I go through the basketball season, and I thank God that sports came back after COVID. We've got college football, we've got the NFL, we're getting the Masters, we're getting everything that we missed out in the summer back. But when the time comes and I get to watch the greatest rivalry in American sports, and it's in an empty gym, that's when I'll be like, I wish we'd had this under control before this got around, because that will feel weird.
Yeah, that's going to be probably the weirdest game of the entire season because, I mean, you're still going to come in with a pretty high level of energy, but you're going to be able to throw a ball in from the
side
out of bounds. Yeah, from the sideline out of bounds without having people inches from touching you from their student section. When they go on runs, there's not going to be a student section to get loud. Maybe an artificial student section, but there will more than likely be cardboard cutouts staring back at you in the stands. That's I think that's, another factor that we've got to sort of take into consideration here for Carolina. In some of these other games, we didn't really talk about that, but, it's got to be weird for these guys when they step out there and there's no one out there. Some of the neutral site games, you probably played, some teams before where it's like, okay, well that, it makes sense. And even some of the tournaments, they're not always full during the holiday times because, well, people are still focused a little bit on football. People are traveling with family, everything like that. But when you get into some of those ACC conference games and there's limited capacities, or then that game where you go to Cameron Indoor Stadium, which is the toughest environment in college basketball in a lot of people's minds, and you see no fans in the stands, I mean, how are you going to react to that? That's where, Roy Williams, who hasn't faced this himself, is going to have to be able to adjust on the fly and keep his guys motivated. And the same with Coach K on the other side. It's going to be a weird environment, but Yeah, I mean, this Saturday, I get it. I always like the one matchup during the week to start the year, mainly for bragging rights. If you go in the day after that, you get to see your coworkers that were Duke fans if you won and celebrate in their face the day after. You don't have to wait until Monday to be able to do it. So, I mean, I think it's definitely interesting that they're going Saturday. Like you mentioned, that's TV really controlling how things are going. And I'm not, totally against the moves, but yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see that matchup, especially because this year, Duke still has pretty decent expectations, but I feel like for the first time in a while, there are some people I feel like the Blue Devils are vulnerable.
Yeah, no, Duke, wasn't picked to win the ACC this year. They continue to lose a lot of talent. Granted, they keep on bringing in a lot of talent, but I think they've proven to themselves the way that they're trying to win in the current slate of college basketball isn't as successful as they thought they were going to be if they won that title in 2015 with the one and done player. But they're still going to be a top 10 team. They're still going to be a really hard team for, they're still going to be a favorite to win this conference, win a national championship, this, that, and the third. So the thing about that game is you finish that game, and I think that this is where the game being moved to Saturday really hurts, because then Carolina normally plays on Monday. So even though the game's going to be different, it'll be a different setting, a different scene when you watch that game, you still got to get ready to play in 48 hours at home against Miami, whereas usually if you had Wednesday to Saturday, you had a lot of time to recover from the emotional, whether the emotional high or the emotional letdown of losing of that game. So I think that's what really sucks. So you get Miami at home, then you get all the way to Virginia. And this is where I'm going to have my quirk. I understand that we got to go play Virginia and we need to play Virginia. But this is the third time that Carolina has played Virginia just one time, and it's been in Charlottesville. As opposed to the only playing them one time in Chapel Hill. I think the ACC has really messed up here by not taking advantage of the fact that Virginia is back nationally relevant for the first time since the 1980s. If you think about the ACC in the 80s, it wasn't just Duke and Carolina and NC State. Virginia was really good. They were making Final Fours. They were favorites to win the national championship. They made the Carolina-Virginia games really exciting. Why would you not, with an expanded ACC schedule, have these two schools play twice a year? It's good for the sport, and it's really good for your conference. So that's all I'm asking. I know we got to go play them, but if I'm tired of all the time to go play them in their building, make them come back to our building and let us play them.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing that I think is has to get corrected first, is the fact that every time that we only play them once in a season, we have to go up to Charlottesville and play them. That's really getting pretty old pretty quick. But I agree with you. I do think at this point you definitely have to play them twice a year for the foreseeable future, if possible, because of where where the game's at. We're actually sort of the rivalry is at. This has grown into a bit of a rivalry.
Especially, maybe, I don't know for you, me as a fan, I hate them.
Oh, I would say, yeah, they're right up there. I mean, Duke and State, I think, are still ahead of them. Duke for sure, but State, I mean, you could even have a little bit of a conversation there just because State is not good. So we normally own them. Where Virginia, I mean, this is a game that has humongous implications in the ACC year in and year out for the past 5 or 6 years. Tony Bennett is seen as a guy that's probably a once-in-a-generation coach, very similar to Roy Williams, very similar to Mike Krzyzewski. So, I mean, it's growing into one of those matchups that, as a Tar Heel fan, you're not always grateful to see it on the schedule because it's a tough game. But at the same time, that game has a lot of meaning, and you want to be able to say, hey, we beat this Virginia team. For Carolina this year, I mean, look, again, that's another environment that is not going to be the same. I'd be very shocked if they're back to normal there. I mean, it looks like they're not even going to play high school sports in the state of Virginia this year. So you can see how strict the restrictions are going to be there. But still, that's a tough place to go play. That's a good Virginia team that, again, is favored to win the ACC this year. So, I mean, it definitely stinks. The good news is that the other team from Virginia, you draw them at home this year because that's another place where you just you don't like going. You are not good in the state of Virginia on the road.
Yeah, no. And they come back from that trip to Charlottesville and they get the Hokies at home. We all saw what Mike Young did his first year in Blacksburg last year. The record may not have been pretty, but he proved that he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. That program is not going to drop off after Buzz Williams took them to the Sweet 16. They're going to be a factor once he gets his system installed. He gets his players. We know the problems we have with him at Wofford. They beat Carolina